Now we've come to the last stage, right? So we've got our house analogy, right? Eric and I have talked. We know exactly what he wants. We've got our blueprints outlined, and he's signed off on it and said, yep, that's what I want. So now we've got to come up with how much it's going to cost. And then there's also a contract to build, right? So we call that a bill of materials and a statement of work. A bill of materials is like literally a list of all the components involved. So network switches, servers, SANs, how many quantities, right? What are the SKUs? What's our cost? What's the profit margin we're going to put on that? What's the final customer cost? So that's a bill of materials, and that's going to give us basically our hard cost on goods. So all your component pieces, the products themselves, hard cost on goods, that's the bill of materials. Then you have professional services, right? Now, our consulting organizations, all the companies we have, a lot of them make money on professional services. We actually make more money on professional services lots of times than we do on the product sales, because what makes us valuable is the fact that we can bring all these disparate components together and create a solution that does something different that works for somebody else, right? If you look through any of the website, or if you've ever heard somebody say the alchemist, that's what the alchemist does, right? And so what we want to do is bring all these component solutions together, and then with the statement of work, which is effectively a labor contract, it basically says, we're going to do these things, and it's going to cost you this much, right? And what we're going to do is we want to design a statement of work that we could literally hand to the project manager and say, this is the statement of work, this is the labor contract, move forward, right? And they're going to assign timelines. They're going to say, this step is going to take 8 hours, this step is going to take 40 hours. The great news about that is if we get further down the road and the customer's like, oh, well, I really want to do this, I really want the house to be red instead of blue. Okay, well, we can change it, but we're going to have to do a change of scope. And literally all that is an addendum to the contract that says, all right, we all agree that it's going to be this much and it's going to be more or less money, right? But really, it's very important to stick with that statement of work contract. There's two types of labor out there. There's time and materials, which is literally kind of like a taxi cab. If you're in my car and we're driving around, you're paying me, right? The time the clock is running. Statement of work, what we want to do is we want to execute that project with the highest amount of efficiency, making the project more profitable because it's fixed bid, right? If it's $40,000 and I can do it in $10,000 worth of cost, that's a lot better for the company. And that's a lot better for your bonus ultimately as well. So it's really important that when we're designing these statements of work that we have all of our contingencies covered while not screwing the customer over, but at the same time thinking through all those steps. And I'll give you a little trick that Jeremy and I used to do when we were writing statements of work all the time. We would go through and we would say, okay, cool, well, I'm going to use the house analogy because it's a little bit easier to understand. All right, we're going to do the dirt work. We're going to do the foundation. We're going to do the framing. We're going to put the brick on the wall. We're going to paint the insides. Jeremy, how long do you think it's going to take to do the brick? And Jeremy would say, I think it's going to take 3 days. I think it's going to take 4 days, right? And so what we would do is we'd figure out which one we think is right. And it would be like, well, I think it's going to take more because the guys have to drive an hour to the site, right? So we discuss why we think it's going to take a little bit longer, and then we typically add 20%. Because one thing that's funny about human beings, they're really bad about estimating time, okay? Don't feel bad. We've all done it. We've all been there. We're all optimistic. But the goal of that is to, if he was running point on writing a statement of work, he's going to come to me and we're going to set and spend 30 minutes to review it and go through all the line items, right? Make sure we didn't miss anything. And at the end of that, we're probably going to add 20% to the hours figure, and that's how we come up with a dollar amount.
So if I can piggyback on that just a little bit, what Ryan's talking about is probably one of the greatest stumbling blocks you can run into when delivering a project to a client, which is we are all optimists. We think best case scenario, we can complete this build in 30 days. Well, if you tell the client 30 days, they're going to expect 30 days.
Right.
If you come in with a realistic estimate and say, we think we can do it in 60 days, and in reality, we do it in 45 days, that's a much better look for our company, a much better look for you, and the client's much happier because now we've delivered something, on budget, under the timeline constraints that we've set. And
Really, what you're talking about is setting expectations. I mean,
Absolutely.
if I tell you I'm going to build you a 10 gig network, and it's actually 30 gigs, you're going to be happy.
I got
right?
something for free.
Yeah, and if I deliver on time or just below, in this process, there's a lot of power that comes with it, and it's make or break. And so what we really want to do is err on the side of conservative without screwing the client over, being fair to the client. That's what we're looking for.
One of the important aspects I would like to add to this is the assumptions. So, for example, in the house example earlier, we may write into that contract that says we expect the homeowner to take care of separately of all the costs of their water, sewer, and electrical installations. We're not covering that. We're expecting that they're going to own the land and they're going to have all of those connections ready for us. So that way, if we get into the project and we're out there building the house and we find out there's no water, sewer, or electric hookups, and that's going to cost an extra 50 grand to do that, we can go and do a change of scope with the customer to do that. While we can protect ourselves with these assumptions, I do want to caution us on the way we use those. It's important that the customer understand those and that we don't just bury it down in the fine print. I've seen some organizations attach 20 pages of fine print that literally covers everything under the sun. And if you get to the point with a client where you're having to go pull out the fine print, there's a good chance that your relationship with the client's already headed downhill. So we want to put those assumptions in there, those requirements for proper expectation setting, but we have to make sure that the customer is aware of those.
You know, and I'll just give a real easy example. A lot of times with our statements of work, there's a tier 1 exclusion. What that means is like your employees are not going to be calling our help desk, right? Because that by the hour can burn through the profitability of the project. So there's a lot of these interesting little exclusions, and I think over time if you're actually writing statements of work, you'll start to understand it. But really, the point of what we wanted to drive across is even if you're not involved in the solutions architecting, we really wanted everybody to be able to understand, like how do we get from A to B, and what is everything involved in that process. So.
The easiest way to sum that up is really just no surprises. The whole point of doing this is to have a open and transparent line of communication between the company and the client so that we're never surprised and they're never surprised. And if we are surprised, we're covered.
And every person working on the project should have at least a high-level view of what's in that statement of work, because we have project managers who should be reading that statement of work, and they'll understand it. But it's also important for the engineers working on it to be able to know, hey, that wasn't covered in the statement of work. I need to let my project manager know.
Well, understanding all the component pieces of the project. Like Eric's going to do this, which means he can toss it off to me, and then I'm going to do this and toss it off to you. Understanding aggregately what it is you're doing and why it all comes together.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.